Hey gamers, this is Liz Davidson from Beyond Solitaire, and I'm back for a brand new season of the podcast with one of my favorite guests and favorite people generally, Jason Perez from Shelf Stories. How you doing, Jason?
Yo, my peoples, what's up? I'm leading off this time. I finally got the lead off spot for one of your seasons.
Yes, and it is well-deserved. I'm really excited for what we are about to talk about, but I actually have to make a pod news announcement first, and that is that Beyond Solitaire has improbably picked up a sponsor. So,
wow, yay, someone's
right?
giving you resources to help you with things. That's fabulous.
Just enough to pay the hosting fees, and I will take it. So I'm now being sponsored by Central Michigan University's Center for Learning Through Games and Simulations. In other words, there's an entire university department that's dedicated to games in the classroom, both the art of teaching them and a press that is now making them.
Fantastic.
So the tagline is just that we believe that learning like games should be compelling, and I will be updating you throughout the season with projects that they are up to. But now down to business. I will say, though, one thing that I'm happy about in this situation is that I actually do believe in the CMU mission. So yes, it gives me no pain whatsoever to promote it.
Very cool.
Yeah, it's nice when you actually care about your advertising. All right. So we are sort of reprising a discussion that we had back at SD HistCon 2021 a few weeks ago, where we talked about gaming tourism and the use of history as sort of a comfort balm as opposed to actual history in games. So this has begun as your brainchild. So do you want to give us the delineation of what we were talking about?
Okay, yes, we are talking about history in games, and any reviewer, you ask, the two of us, you ask Dan Thoreau, you ask anybody who wants to take history at least somewhat seriously in games, we wonder what to do with games that are clearly not really in it for the history. Like there's some games that are, and this is Beyond Solitaire. Liz is going to have plenty of games that take the history very, very seriously. But then there's a whole category of games. They tend to be more popular, more appealing to the mass market that are clearly using history. We'll talk about them in the course of this episode, like games like Hadrian's Wall, games like Puerto Rico, games, colonization games, and building, city building games. Like there's all these, generally Euro economic games, but they don't have to be, but these games that use history, but they're not, as Liz was saying, not really using history, they're not centering that. They're trying to do it for something else. So then I've figured out that the way that those games use it, or the lens that I want to use, so this is what the episode's about. The lens that I want to use is historical tourism. Okay. So then Liz kind of let the cat right out of the bag. Well, thank you, Liz.
I'm up front.
Right. In the sense that, okay, what is the difference between a historical tourism game and a history game? So a history game wants to present an argument about history, right? And it's usually presenting multiple sides, and it's usually presenting some kind of conflict, because all of history is conflict. And there's something to learn, right? And it inspires critical thinking. An historical tourism game, by contrast, is leveraging the history. It's taking the history and taking advantage of people's familiarity with the history. I've heard of Hadrian, I've heard of Puerto Rico, I've heard of all these things. And they're leveraging it for attention, sales, and comfort. At the end of the day, the primary goal of an historical tourism game is leveraging the content for the attention. It leaps off the shelf at people. They're more likely to buy it, and they're more likely to enjoy it and have a good time, shut their mind off, and have a nice, relaxing time in the history. Why is that called that tourism? Because isn't that what you do as a tourist? You're going down to, La Isla del Encanto, Puerto Rico, and, you're not sitting there doing anything. You're just, enjoying your time on the beach, and not, and not using your mind. So then, or like you go into the Hall of Presidents in Epcot Center, and there's Jaw Jack and Abe Lincoln, Honest Abe. He's chopping down a cherry tree. Yeah. This like putting your forearm up like this, not the universal sign of like, okay, this is hokey. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
On the podcast, I'm doing the thing with my hand. Go ahead and check out Shelf Stories. By the way, the video of this recording is on Shelf Stories, my YouTube channel. Anyway,
absolutely.
So then So then, you go to the Hall of Presidents in Epcot Center. You're not there to learn real history. You're there to kind of get the stylized, feel good, sometimes even jingoistic, but depending on what it's trying to do. But it's definitely not presenting real history. It's presenting this sheen, this veneer of history that is trying to evoke certain emotions in the audience. So then that's my lens, my current lens for understanding these Euro games and popular mass market games that are trying to make themselves available to an audience by passing them through this screen, this filter that cleans out the difficult parts.
And I do think this is worth talking about, partially because publishers are doing to sell games, but also because people are saying that that's what they want. I mean, just yesterday on Facebook, I saw yet another comment: "Keep your politics out of my games."
No politics. Oh no.
I am just gaming for fun. I'm so tired after work. I'm doing this to turn my brain off and just have a good time. So why is that a problem?
Why is it a problem? Because it's history. Because and I'll say this because we're gonna do 2 episodes, and we're gonna talk specifically about war games and how like war games in particular are, they challenge us, right? and how do you depict brutality? How do you gamify these things? But just from the very beginning here, I don't have a problem with people's fun. I'm not against fun. I like fun. Do we get accused, Liz, of being the no fun people, the scoldy, wokey, whatever people that just want to ruin people's fun? Do you ever get accused of that?
Actually, no. My students think I'm boring. That's about it.
Well, I'm the one causing good trouble, so I get accused of that all the time. That we're out to ruin people's fun, and like we're just trying to make people feel guilty. We're trying to upset people, maybe to get power over them or to evoke a reaction to them. Like I am Shelf Stories is what it is, but I'm also in the Dice Tower. Dice Tower is all about fun. I'm also in the One Stop Co-op Shop. One Stop Co-op Shop is also about fun. All the fun, right? I am cool with fun. It becomes difficult when these history topics that aren't so fun get appropriated and pass through that screen, that filter, where it's like, okay, this aspect of history, whatever it is an opportunity to learn, an opportunity to enrich ourselves culturally, or an opportunity to kind of reflect on what went wrong. There's all sorts of things that can happen with a history, grappling with history, but passing it through the film, passing it through the must make the audience comfortable, passing it through the let's put our brains away. And what results on the other side is often this like, to anybody who knows anything about history, it's what am I playing here? What's happening and we'll get into it throughout the course of the episode, the exact things that are happening on the table that once you pass it through that filter. So then, no, there's nothing wrong with fun. However, there is a difficulty when you take things that actually happened and things that people have memory about, especially if you're from a different perspective, especially from a marginalized perspective. So like if you're passing the game like Puerto Rico through the filter, then I recognize what Puerto Rico is in history compared to what's on the table, and the differences stick out. They won't stick out if you don't know. And so in a way, it's like people are defending their right to not know. And that's not a thing that I'm going to defend.
I think that's fair. So let's go into some specific examples. I'm going to go ahead and lead with Hadrian's Wall, since we have both talked about this one, and because it fits in with some of my work from my own site and from last season. So Hadrian's Wall's rulebook.
Well, tell people what it is. What is Hadrian's Wall?
It is. What weight would you say that is?
It's a roll and write. It's a flip and write. So like lighter, but it's basically a giant spreadsheet. And you're rolling a dice and you entering the values in roll and write style. You're trying to build a wall. And there's a whole bunch of boxes, tons of them. And as you're flipping the cards and you're getting, inputs, you're entering them in depending on where you want to do, what aspect of the wall you want to build. And so it's taking the flip and write genre and kind of pushing it in terms of its complexity about as far as it can go. It's probably like a 2.5, which is a pretty crazy weight for a flip and write. But they managed to do it.
Say, is it a mid-weight roll and write? Is that how you describe it?
Yeah. It is definitely way more complex than your average roll and write. Yes. That's why people love it, at least in our community.
Yes. And I've seen some footage. It looks great. I haven't played it myself, but I hear it's a really, really good puzzle. However, I have read the rule book, and
I read the rule book.
Huh?
Oh, we read the rule.
Oh, yes, we have. There is a major issue right at the beginning of the rule book, at least for me, and for you as well, because there's just a little disclaimer about, oh, the workers in this game, some of those were slaves. And we're going to honor them for 2 seconds before continuing on to our fun. So you could just skip the little side text box and go forward. And I don't know. I just don't feel like that's enough. If you're either don't acknowledge it at all or take it seriously. But I sort of feel like the little ass covering, oh, there's slaves in here. We are going to acknowledge that. And that's enough.
It's basically like the Surgeon General's warning on a cigarette box. Or like people don't notice this, but like and if you go to like McDonald's or especially where I'm from, New York, they have the calorie count listed on your, whatever it is, your combo. So it's like 1,400 calories for this one meal, which if you know anything about calories, that's terrible. And like it's there, and it's there for people to know, so they can't, it's like they can't be accused of hiding it. However, how many people actually process what the calorie count is? How many people actually process the Surgeon General's warning? How many people actually process that, like, oh, there's a disclaimer that says that it was slaves that actually built this thing, but throughout the rest of the rule book, we're going to call them servants, well, workers or whatever. I think they're called servants, actually.
Yeah, well, actually, that's something I have to correct in my class all the time. The Latin word for slave is servus, servus. It looks like servant.
Right.
And my students instinctively will translate it that way. And I have to stop them and be like, no, we cannot do that because that's sanitizing. You have to be real. The Romans were messed up, and we're not going to hide that in this class.
But we're going to hide that in Hadrian's Wall.
We are. Yes, absolutely. We're going to make it sound a lot better. And those of you who are aware of my work so far know that I recently wrote a series of blog posts and did a podcast with Dan Throw talking about gladiator games and how we like to think of gladiators as fighting for honor and glory. It's fun. They're doing it for the fame, while downplaying the fact that most gladiators were slaves. And I have issues with Hadrian's Wall on similar grounds. It's not that you can never have a game about Hadrian's Wall. It's that you shouldn't give a nod to the existence of slaves and then spend the rest of your time pretending they were never there.
Right. I have the same criticism of Puerto Rico, which has been my thing for the last year. And I'm celebrating 1 year of that video coming out as this video comes out, which is pretty cool. 1 year of good trouble on Shelf Stories. I'm very happy about that. And so it tells a similar lie of that the slaves that come over on the ship that work your fields, the original rule book called them colonists. Right. And they're not colonists. That makes it sound like, okay, there was a bunch of immigrants that came in, they worked the land and they got rich on their own, Horatio Algier style. No, thank you. Those were slaves. And they died and they rebelled and they stole and they killed their masters and they did all these things in real life. This is real life stuff we're talking. And they, that's completely erased in the game because the workers in Puerto Rico are very inert. You bring them off the ship and they do all the work that you want them to. Do you want them to go to the city? They go to the city. Do you want them to, hack some corn? They hack some corn. Whatever you want. They're just bound by the game engine, not by any kind of agency on the part of the workers. So then that's not history. So and that's part of why I wanted to distinguish a historical game from a historical tourism game. When we get into online conversations about this and we criticize these things, very often you'll say, well, we can't erase history. It happened, and all this defense of what is. And it's like, well, is that really history? Or is there a lie right in the middle of the history for the sake of our comfort? Once we've admitted the lie, which is very obvious, just open 5 pages of a history textbook and you'll see the lie. Then you'll see that this is not real history. So I want to be able to craft a category where we're talking about what's happening in these kind of mass marketing type games or broader audience type games. And I want to be able to talk about that separate from an actual history game. All the stuff that Liz is talking about on her channel, history up and down. Be honest, I'll tell you that right now. So, look at that. I got Days of Fire, Knights of Fire right behind me. They've been there the whole time. History. Closer to history than other games. But then whatever it is. So, and I could talk about how they pull it off in a second, but there's a difference between games that present arguments about history and games that have to lie. Let's just call it what it is. Lie in order to appeal to people and make them comfortable playing.
You know what's interesting about that, though, is you're pointing out when you said, but it really happened. What fascinates me about that is you're pointing out a very interesting little pulse point. I don't know how long we want to dwell on this, right?
Sure, let's do it. Let's dwell on pulses. I like that.
But we are okay with lies of omission, if that makes sense. It's okay to kind of scrub away something that's unpleasant. But if you do something that's perceived, at least, as a lie, where you're kind of updating a historical situation to include a greater diversity of people, which actually is often quite accurate. Within the Roman history community, there's been a raging arguments because, people want to present even British Romans as very white, but Rome itself was a very multicolored, multinational, multi-province, right, empire. And so when you want to add in some diversity, for example, or add in something that's a little bit imaginative, that makes things more palatable for a modern, play group, that's a problem. And you will inevitably get somebody that yells at you about it, that's not fair. You shouldn't put that in there. I remember people arguing about Game of Thrones treatment of women and it being like, well, women in the Middle Ages were treated horrible. It's just historical. It's fantasy. So I guess what I'm saying, right, is I find it very interesting that there are some lies, right, that maybe aren't even really lies, or just perceptions about how we think the world should be, how we want it to be, that we have a problem with, or you'll get a firestorm about in a community, right? But then if you have an actual historical inaccuracy through omission, that's okay, because I just want to play my game.
So, you had Dr. Rail, Dr. Patrick, or you're going to have Dr. Patrick appear on the show.
I'm going to have him, yeah.
Going to have him on this season of Beyond Solitaire. I can do advertising too. And ask any game designer that wants to do something serious with their history. Like Cole Worley talked about this too. Games have to lie. Games have to gloss. Right? Yes. Every game has to in order to be a fun game at all, you have to, filter out a lot. So if I'm making a worker game, I'm not going to, if I'm like a boss and I'm having a worker, I'm not going to put in all the stuff that makes a worker. I'm not going to pay, sales tax. I'm not going to have HR. I'm not going to do all the things I have to do. I'm a boss and I'm going to make my worker do what it can. Hopefully you pay it. A lot of games you don't, which I got a problem with that too, but whatever. But you have to streamline a lot in order to get a game to the table that functions and works. So inherent in the game making process is a process of glossing and omitting and editing. So that's not, I'm not by making the argument that games shouldn't lie. I'm not saying that games shouldn't gloss, because games have to gloss. I want simple, fun games. I think the questioning is, what is getting glossed and how are we glossing it? And it stands out that the gloss almost always is in favor of power, is in favor of oppression. And that's the thing that hangs over this discussion, which a lot of people don't want to talk about. What we're talking about is bosses oppressing workers. We're talking about, white supremacists oppressing, marginalized people. We're talking about, patriarchy. We're talking about colonialism. The glosses that happen, the lies that happen are almost always based on oppression. Real world oppression. And it's not just about defense, real world oppression just has, resonance today. Why do I have a problem with Puerto Rico? Because Puerto Rico is in a very similar colonial spot than was 400 years ago. Has much changed before 400 years ago to now. Ask a lot of Puerto Ricans who know what's going on, and they'll say, okay, some things have changed. Obviously, we have running water now. That's great. But we are a colony. We are a neo-colony. And where did that come from? 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. And why am I playing that again in my game? And not only why am I playing it, why am I glossing it? Why am I lying about it in order to feel comfortable entering into that space? Because I have no problem with games that want to present difficult history. This Guilty Land gets quoted a lot by Emma Holland. You're basically playing a slaver. And the game says, you are a slaver, be a jerk. And that sit in that emotion of being an oppressive jerk. And some people do that. And that's fine within the play space, because there's, whatever we could talk about, the play space, talk about more of that in part 2. But I don't have an inherent problem with playing the slaver, playing the jerk, playing the bird. It's when the game makes you play the jerk, but then lies to you and says, "Oh, you're not actually a jerk. Yeah, you're a boss, but you're a nice boss. Yeah, you're a nice boss." so like and basically lies to you. And I got no problem with regular game. Like I have no problem with Small World. I have no problem with Catan. They don't like evoke real history. It's when you evoke real history that I start to have the problem with the way we sanitize exercises of power in these games.
That's, I think, very, very on point. And I mean, even in your real life, think about how many bosses you knew or have had who were horrible bosses, who saw themselves as the good guy and you were the annoying worker. And the other thing that these games do is not only do they change the narrative a bit to support power, but by doing that, they're also denying agency to the groups that are marginalized in those games. So it's not just an issue of who's in charge. It's also an issue of who gets to take action in a way that makes sense for them and who they are. And I think that that's interesting as well. I mean, the servants in Hadrian's Wall are very happy to do your bidding, but that's probably not an accurate depiction of what was going on.
Like I call them boss fantasy games. Like what is the ideal of any boss, any capitalist, any person who runs a business, whatever. Nice, pliant workers who don't get sick, who don't have children, who don't have sick children, who don't get called out. They show up whenever you want to, and you pay them nothing, and they don't bother about it. Like that is a boss fantasy, right? And this is where I tend to focus on economic Euro games, because the perspective of an economic Euro game is almost always a boss of something, and every boss just wants to streamline away all difficult parts, like paying workers and caring about their health. And that's look in labor history throughout, and I'm kind of a labor history guy. It's always the bosses that are trying to do the minimum. And so when we go to these games, we go into these kind of tourist boss fantasy games, well, then we could realize every boss's fantasy, which is at least in respect to workers. Oh, we don't have to pay the workers. Let's focus on the quote unquote real challenge of bossing, which is making money.
What's so interesting about this too is that I would venture to guess that the majority of people who play games and enact these boss fantasies are not themselves bosses in real life. Mm-hmm. I think that these games, in some ways make us happy and make us feel relaxed because they are a space where we control so much and we can live our fantasy of everyone efficiently doing our bidding, and everything's really just up to us and how meritocratically deserving we are. And I think that one of the reasons it's hard to spot that sort of tourism feeling is because it really feeds on things that we want. Look at people who get addicted to video games. It's because those video games reward you. They make you more powerful. They make you more wealthy for doing whatever it is that the game chooses to reward. It feels good. And I guess the question is, how do we start to step out of that?
Okay. All right. So have we kind of explained the bullshit? You probably have to bleep that.
This ain't no Dice Tower. We can leave it.
There's lots of, just before we get to like because I got a lot to way forward. Because we covered like the kinds of lies, like we talked about the straight up lie to your face, right? Change a word into another word that feels nice. That is a style of lie. We have talked about lies of omission, right?
Yes.
And there are ways in which games that try to omit things, or there's like middle ways. They kind of lie, but they kind of don't. I wanted to mention AuZtralia in that case. Mm-hmm. I think Dan, again, hi Dan, hopefully was listening, made a comment about this, about how I'm gonna play a colonialism game, and Martin Wallace admitted this in the podcast. I want to do this. I want to tell the story of Australian colonialism from the perspective of the colonizers, but I don't want to engage in the brutality in the history. So I'm going to change the indigenous into Cthulhu monsters. And I'm going to weave this story about how the Cthulhu monsters came in, wiped out the Indians, or wiped out the indigenous folks in Australia. And then, the colonists, which in the game of AuZtralia is like this multicultural group. It's not just like, the white people. So he changed that too, or remixed it a little bit. And now it's okay. And that is not okay. That is washing. Because, again, this goes back to your point of agency. I mean, if you're an indigenous person in Australia, and, if you had any power to tell your story, you would not tell the story this way. Yes. It would, you would not replace yourself with a Cthulhu monster and, exist to be conquered. And, or nor would you just kind of switch sides and join up with the colonists. Like that is not a thing that you would do either. So you have an entire fiction where, the people that are involved in the historical time period, again, it's so important that this is history, because history has actual real things attached to them and people with memory of those real things. And that's the, real key too. Like if anyone who has an historical memory will look at this and go, that is not the changes that certain perspectives would make. Right. And they're always marginalized folks. They're always marginalized folks. That has to be centered. Okay.
The other thing that I do want to bring up about that, though, talking about agency, right, is that, okay, so we're talking about narratives that promote power, that continue to push down the marginalized, and their agency is something we're talking about. But if you are a person in power, just as with the patriarchy, just as with racism, when you are hurting others, you are hurting yourself. And I think another aspect of this is that the other person who loses agency when you enact that boss fantasy is you, because you wanted the more opiate version of the game that comforted you and lied to you. And you don't even know what you just consented to,
right?
Who you've agreed to be when you enter that role, if you have not taken a moment to be thoughtful about it. I think that in something like This Guilty Land, or, I talk about Spartacus all the time. Yeah. Because in that game, you are a Leonista who buys and kills gladiators and bets on whether somebody's getting beheaded in that fight, but that's who you are. And so you get to choose. And I also think that kind of making games more palatable also does take away your right to choose what you're embodying and the history that you're choosing to live out within the world of the game.
Right. So like, comparing Spartacus, which, you are a right jerk and the game is telling you be a jerk and enter the space. As long as the game is, active and consensual and open and informative about what you're doing, then I'm having a problem. Compare that to a game like Gladius, which I'm sure that Liz has a lot to say about Gladius. That's a newer game, drafting game or bidding game. Where you're, bidding gladiators and, a simple card game, right? But you are basically like a promoter for WWE in that game. Like, you're hiring these wrestlers and you're making the wrestlers doing stuff and you're betting on the outcome, where, modern sport is not an analog for the kind of thing that happened in, Roman gladiator games. It was much more ownership driven. It was you're much more of a jerk.
Yeah. Well, Gladius
as we would define it in the 21st century.
Indeed. Well, Gladius is particularly interesting to me because the game is, and I say this as a progressive person, right? It's a progressive's dream. The art is diverse. There are characters of all types, both among the players and the gladiators. So if you are looking for a game with representation and a game that, there are female designers and female artists on that team, it's everything that you're looking for if you're trying to increase diversity in gaming and inclusion in gaming by modern standards. That doesn't change the fact that you're betting on gladiators. The game has very Roman trappings. The game got a pull quote from a professor of art history talking about how the game is such a beautiful representation of true diversity and agency among the Roman people. And the moment you do that, you have to acknowledge you're betting on slaves. So you're talking about all this agency and all this freedom literally on the backs of people who are slaves. And if you don't have a problem with that because it ticks so many other boxes for you, I have many questions.
So you're talking about, so we can go on and on about like the lies that games tell. There's a lot of these games. So there's a lot of flavors of lie. And again, not gloss, because the games have to gloss lies that if the gamer knew what you were doing, the gamer might check out.
Yep.
That would, maybe that's one way to separate a gloss from a lie. That like if the gamer actually knew it and processed this, like, oh, I don't want to play this. And you're denying them that choice. Okay. Yes. So that's number one. There is nothing that says that gives a creator the sacred right to use history in a game. You know, that you don't have a say. You don't say like, okay, because that's a big thing, right? Oh, you can't constrain creators. You know, you can't. You know, they have to be able to be free to do what they want. Okay, that on the surface level is fine. And yes, like I'm not going to say shut down the printing presses. I'm not going to say, you know, pox on their lands and they may never make anything again. I'm not going to say that, but you know, so they can make your game. So that is true on a factual level. You do have the freedom in America or in like a free society. You make what you want, but it is not free of consequences. It is not free of criticism. And when someone makes that kind of game, even, you know, diversity laden or whatever it is, there is still the criticism that comes from someone who has an historical memory and from someone who is attuned to the voices of marginalized folks in history and are marginalized folks being represented in this game that are baked into that should be there. That game could have been the WWE game. That game could have been, you know, the MMA game or some like, you know, drafting, fighting or whatever it is, but they chose to put it like you said, Liz, with Roman trappings. And once you add the Roman trappings, we're so used to in our society being able to kind of separate out, you know, and just like, okay, I'm going to use this part of history. I'm going to use this culture. Like, you know, let's spin the culture wheel. Let's spin the history wheel. And I'm just going to take that out. And that is not like, as historians, and I'm not like a historian, but I like this stuff. I can't separate this stuff, and nor do I think a healthy community should.
Yes.
So you know, so like have all the fun you want, but when you pull in these history things, it comes with consequences that we are articulating. Criticism is not cancellation. I'm not calling for the cancellation of stuff, but I am calling for us to really think hard about that, whether that's what we want to be doing with our history.
Yeah, I think that it's very important to say criticism and cancellation are not the same thing. As a historian, I'm going to criticize anything that steps on my turf that seems worthy of criticism. I mean, it's just part of the job. Yeah. it's just like I'm a game reviewer. You know, when I review
I'm not going to shut my brain down because I'm a gamer. I mean, as a matter of fact, my fun is using my brain. Yeah. You know, and like you're inviting people into this space and almost like commanding them, again, the agency thing, shut your brain down. That's the only way to have, you know, the only way to have fun in this space is to shut your brain down. And I'm saying that's not my fun. Yeah, I come into this space, I am promised fun. And why is fun defined the one way, the lowest way? Shut your brain down. My fun is using my brain. And if I use my brain, not in like some weird way where I'm like making like impossible connections, if I use my brain to just know stuff and connect a few dots, it's not like I'm inventing things whole cloth, like remembering that there were slaves in Rome or remembering that there were slaves in Puerto Rico. That is not like out of the realm. It's just using my brain. And that's fun for me. And I'm being told, don't have your kind of fun, Jason, because we want this. No, I'm not cool with that.
I completely freely admit I am a navel gazer. I love to just kind of chew on stuff and think about things and try to draw connections because that is actually who I am as a person, you know, like it or not, that's me. So, you know, my low grade fun is at least doing something like a jigsaw puzzle.
Right.
I mean, I'm still putting something together. I'm still working my brain on some level because that is what I like to do. You know, I can understand the desire to relax and turn your brain off sometimes. My therapist actually tells me I should do it more often, but but that's not actually how I'm wired. And, you know, picking things apart, putting them back together, you know, that is my fun. And I'm with you on that, you know, I don't understand why it would not be fun to learn more about the setting of a game or to think about how it's made, where it's coming from. What does it say? I mean, why isn't that fun?
Yeah. And so, you know, it goes both ways. Like someone who is on like, I call him like the nice moderate guy, right? So the nice moderate guy would be like, okay, you know, you're ruining my fun by pointing this out. It's like, all right, well, now we're in a little bit of Mexican standoff over here. Like, you know, by defending these obvious historical lies, you're ruining Jason's fun. And by me speaking up, I'm ruining their fun. So like, how do we resolve? Right. And so, you know, the way forward, like we do not have a sacred right to these historical games. If you can't pull a comfortable, happy historical game off with your subject matter, then you don't have a sacred right to do it. That, put your game on Mars, put your game on, and make some historical fantasy thing. And, there will be a resistance to that because of the attention and the sales. Like that's hanging over this whole thing, right? It's not like great creators can make whatever they want. They're going to make whatever that gets the most attention and sales.
Yeah. I mean, put an SPQR on it and it's going to cross my radar and I'll notice.
Yeah.
Like,
anything with Rome is going to get the attention of Liz and it's going to get covered up beyond solitaire. So like, that is, we have to like kind of put that in there where it's like, okay, creators have the right to make what they want, but like they're saying, okay, I want to make attention and sales. Well, this attention and sales is coming with some really ugly stuff. Like welcome to capitalism. Yeah. Like that's, that there are consequences to this stuff. So like, but that is one way, like, and I have to put that on there. However, some people are going to want to put history in their games. And I like history games. Liz likes history games, so like, what I want to do in terms of like crafting way forward, I break this down into 3 buckets. So like whenever you make a historical game, there's the setting, which is where it is, Rome or Puerto Rico, whatever it is. There's the perspective, like who are you in that? Are you from the perspective of a slave or a perspective of a boss? Or some kind of other perspective in there. And there's also the audience, right? Who do you want to buy the game and what emotions do you want them to feel? So then break your game down into these 3 buckets and figure out in your current version of the game, where is the lie or what's creating the most problem. So then the game I know best is Puerto Rico. So then the setting of Puerto Rico is not just Puerto Rico, but 1492 Puerto Rico, the new world. It says so in the rule book. So that's where we are. That's the setting. The perspective is a merchant trying to build wealth, build plantations. That, that word tells you what your perspective is. You're a plantation owner, right? So then that game is fine in of itself if it was honest about the slavery and the slave revolts and what had to be done in order to make human beings seeking freedom work your fields. You have to be a historical jerk, right? In order to do that. That game is fine, but then where the problem is the intended audience is the mass market, make them feel good. So now we have created the situations where setting and perspective have to be passed through the filter in order to make the audience happy. That's what creates the lie. So then play with one of those dials, figure out what you want your game to be, and then you could, figure something out. So like in Puerto Rico, you could make it real, not lie. You could put in mechanisms to have the workers have more agency, as Liz was saying, make them rebel, make them run away, which is the rebellion that happened the most was running away, right? Or like do something to your crops, whatever it is. But that would diminish the audience. I can tell you right now, the makers of Puerto Rico do not want to diminish their audience. They want to continue to be able to sell their game at Target, sell their game at, fine stores all over the place. They want to continue to hit that mass market. So then they can't change the audience by making the actual setting and perspective more honest.
Yeah.
So then change your setting, change your perspective. Your setting could be the same place, but in a different time period. Your setting could be the same place, but a different corner of the, why am I doing, the port system? Why can I do this other part of Puerto Rico? The inland where, more like kind of peasant farming was happening. So like change your,
Right. Or like, let's say we're doing medieval Europe or something. You don't have to focus on, the poor peasants suffering in the fields, even though they were there, right? You could do something about monks in a scriptorium. Yeah. You could do something about, you could actually do something about those peasants, but it's like them putting together their Christmas festival that year. And you can acknowledge parts of their lives and have them do stuff that's not go serve the feudal lord.
Right.
I mean, there's so many options. Be creative.
And you're changing the perspective too. You're changing, like, let's say, because again, most Euro games kind of indulge this boss fantasy type thing. And there's plenty of those. So like, I'm not canceling any of them, but like moving forward, do you want your game to have the perspective of a boss fantasy? And if you're trying to make a boss fantasy game that is for the mass market, then that's going to cause problems. It's just going to, especially if it's historical. So then can it be a worker focused? Can you be like an artisan, right? With a shop.
Right.
So like, why do you have to be a lord over serfs? Why can't you be an artisan in a shop?
Right.
You're doing kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Then your workers can be apprentices that you're training and you're actually exchanging value. And that actually seems kind of nice.
And there are plenty of those games two, right? Think of like Heaven and Ale or something like that, where like, you're running a bar and all that kind of thing. So like you can like, there's room to play. There's room to like adjust those dials, the setting, the perspective, and the audience. If you're willing to limit your audience, if you're willing to kind of go for the niche, then you can be a little bit more real and deal with some more difficult things in your game. The game might get popular anyway, which is like the biggest blessing. It's like, ooh, this game is like, Pax Premier.
Yeah.
Right. That game isn't going for the mass market. That game is making a very, sturdy historical argument about what's happening, and it happens to be popular. Great. Then, but if you're talking about like target level, many print run type things, then that's probably not gonna, that's a little bit different. Be willing to change your setting and your perspective in order to accommodate that. Don't just jam in, oh, everybody likes running gladiators, everybody likes being the capitalist. Don't just jam that in to get your audience. You can, but people like me and people like Liz will call you out.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough. So do you want to kind of wrap up here in preparation for our next episode? So this episode's been about historical tourism. Right. Next episode is kind of more about historical realism and how real it can get.
Yes. Now that you've gone through the BS history, what are the issues that are raised when you try to present the real history, particularly in war games? I think war games do probably the best job of presenting history. We'll talk about why.
Absolutely. So for now, everyone, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Jason, thank you so much for coming on as always. Please like, comment, subscribe, and be thoughtful about what's in your historical flavored games this week.
What a dorky sign off. What was that?
It's whatever I want. Happy gaming, everyone.
Later, everybody.